Here it is, Saturday afternoon. You can see on the workbench behind me, we've got a few things already laid out. A couple of colors, they're very bright and vibrant, but not a whole lot of paint on a couple of miniatures that you can see there. Today is all just about being in the studio, doing some raw painting. So let's go over what we got, what I've got to work on, and try to get some work done today. So you can see these colors here are actually on this miniature currently. So I'd like to work on the hair of this beautifully sculpted cloud giant, as well as the club, which I'm going to do in grays so it looks like a stone, and then little bits here and there with some additional color to make it look like some gemstones and possibly some gold or some bronze on the back end. And the hair I would like to work on, so we're going to work this up into whites, but I did undercoating of purple and blue so we can kind of highlight where the shadow and light is going to be, and then use those for tonal colors. Now in addition, we do have a Pegasus. You can see we've got some green stuff. I'm going to just go through and do a little bit of cleanup on this miniature and then start putting down some paint. And we'll probably start with just a blue-gray base coat and build up from there. Though I do see some mold lines and everything that I do want to clean up, so this one's still got a little bit of work to do here in the studio. And then this one here is a troll. So a while ago I did 3 trolls, and this was a 4th of that kind of bunch that I did not get done. But you can see it's got this iron kettle for a helmet. It's got this tortoise shell for a shield. It's got these slats that almost look like fencing or a bridge for part of the armor. So just a really kind of pieced together thing, different types of hide here. Just a funky troll with a lot of character. So we'll probably start with some skin tones on this bad boy, and yeah, start working up from there. This one I am not going to worry as much about some of the smaller mold lines. You can see I've already attached the arm. It was separate initially, but I did attach the arm and the head. Both were separate. But I'm going to be using this on the game table, so I'm not as worried about the aesthetic of the piece. So before I get going, let me just welcome you to Green Oaks Gaming's Twitch channel. If you happen to catch us here live on Twitch, be sure to check out our schedule. I do stream 5 days a week, and it's different content, all designed on my love of tabletop role-playing games and fantasy and sci-fi. We do reviews every Friday where we will look at products or sites or materials or shows or games, all different kinds of things, and just give honest reviews and give you our feedback on them. Her standpoint is she is an enabler, a nerd enabler, and I am just a nerd. So you get 2 kinds of input back on that show. So I think it's pretty interesting. And then Saturdays, of course, that's on Fridays at 6:30 Central Standard Time. And then Saturdays, of course, starting at noon, it's me in the studio just working on miniatures, sometimes maps, sometimes, I mean, who knows? It's just studio time. It depends on what I've got to do. So primarily it's going to focus on miniatures. Oh, I realize my camera is it's set a little funky. Let me adjust this here so that it is not quite. I I'm going to play with the stand a little bit. Bear with me. Just so we can have it at a good angle and location. And height. Okay, there we go. Now I can work on this a little bit better. A little bit more convenient so I can keep it in camera and work on it really well. So yeah, that's Saturday is all just about being in the studio, getting some work done. Sunday, I just do a recap. It is just a half an hour show, so just a recap of the week. And try to do kind of a preview of what we're going to be doing the week coming up. Monday we have a show called The Journey, and it's all about exploring worlds, world building, and adventuring in tabletop role-playing games. Specifically, I work on my homebrew world, the world of Earth, but a lot of good insights if you are thinking about running a campaign, creating adventures, anything like that. Just because I walk you through all the steps that I take in building story and environment in my game world. And just looking for those mold lines here. So this miniature here was part of the Reaper Bones 5 Kickstarter out of one of their expansion packs. This was the Greek Odyssey expansion pack. And I've painted a lot of miniatures out of this expansion pack. The Cloud Giant, actually, that I'm working on is part of this expansion pack. But some beautifully sculpted miniatures with that kind of Grecian theme to them. I would say some of them even have beyond that Grecian theme. They have, you know, you could use them in, say, Romanesque, Mesopotamia, any type of ancient historical. If you're playing in like the game world of Theodos for Dungeons and Dragons, fantastic miniatures for that. So some very cool miniatures. You can see this one here has, I mean, a definite quick identification that this is a Pegasus. And when we assembled, I rated this miniature. It rated pretty decent. The biggest challenge was there are a number of mold lines that had to be cleaned up, which we're working on now. And some gaps in the wings. Multi-part miniatures, it's kind of to be expected. So nothing that I thought was too detrimental. You can see how quick and easy cleanup on this miniature is. You'll be slinging paint before you know it. Now, I have not set up my wet palette yet. I want to for my Cloud Giant because I do want to work on the hair some. I would love to get that Cloud Giant closer to being complete. Such a large miniature. Sometimes those large miniatures, they're very fun, but I find they are extremely daunting just because of the amount of time they take to complete. Where a 28mm, you can, and you definitely still want to take your time and do a good job and everything, but the larger miniatures, because everything is so much bigger in scale, anytime you have an error or you mess something up, it's just that much more larger than life. So it's a little bit more daunting to do those. There's a little bit of a mold line here that's going to be a little challenging, a little bit more challenging to get to. Realistically, I should have done the mold line cleanups before I put the wings on and filled the gaps with the green stuff. But I don't always follow the rules, and I believe there are no rules when it comes to painting and assembling miniatures. You do what feels right. You do whatever is going to give you the best feeling of accomplishment and completion. There we go. Get that out there. And you can see there are lots of little shavings and filings on this that will clean up. And I'll do that here momentarily. Luckily I have a sink very nearby, so I can just do a quick rinse. And for this miniature particularly, I'm going to do it with extremely hot water, just to make sure that all the wings and everything bend really well, get them into place, and then a final rinse with very cold ice water, which I have a bowl just with some ice and water in it, ready to go just for this miniature. Now this miniature is also going to be just used on my tabletop. So you may wonder, why am I doing so much more prep work and cleanup to this versus the troll if I'm going to be using them exactly the same way on my own personal tabletop? And I'll tell you why. Because as I use trolls, I have a few trolls that I really love. I've done a fantastic job, in my opinion, of painting them very well, basing them very well. They look very good, and those are my go-to. So when a party encounters a troll or a pair of trolls, those are the trolls that I pull out and pop on the table because they look fantastic. They're menacing. I'm very proud of the paint job that I did. And so I'm not worried about having a troll represented extremely well beyond that point. Now, if they run into a band of trolls or a nest of trolls or anything like that, that's where this kettle pot is going to come in. And there will be so many trolls on the table that nobody is going to look at the mold lines and start rating how I did on the mold line cleanup and filling gaps. And at that point, they are more concerned with the amount of trolls that are on there, and then small little quirks. So they'll recognize the iron pot. They'll realize that you know, the hides are a little bit different color, but beyond that, they're not going to be going and looking at them in as close a detail. Now, Pegasus, however, I do not have any other Pegasus models. I don't use them a whole ton in my game. So this is the first Pegasus model that I have had. And so I want to do I guess a better job on this. This is going to be something that I can display when it is not in use. I've got a little challenge on that hoof there. It's got some gnarliness to it. It almost looks like it's broken a little bit. Let's see if we can get that on camera. Probably not. Anyhow, it's got a couple of small divots to it. So I may have to put a little more green stuff on there. And just get that last little bits of the mold line there. A little bit here on the face. And I just want a nice clean sculpt. So taking out these mold lines is going to give me that little bit better for display without catching big shadows from these mold lines. Now at first, as I knew I was going to be working on this weekend on today's show, I did a lot of looking at inspiration, and so I hit Google, I hit Pinterest, I hit Cool Mini or Not, I look at the Reaver forums and their preview gallery and their inspiration gallery, just to start getting an idea of how I want to paint my mini. And the biggest thing is anytime you're painting something like this, so I know I definitely want it to be a white Pegasus, but I'm not just going to paint it white because I want to have different tone and really highlight and shade the miniature really well. I wanted to get some good ideas for different tones that have been used for both what works really well, what do I need to avoid, and is there anything that I need to really try to, I hate to say outdo because I'm not like that type of a person, but anything that I need to make sure that I avoid doing poorly. So there we go. I think that's a pretty good cleanup job on those mold lines. Here when I go to do a stretch, we will rinse that out and have that ready to go. All right, just had to check and see if there was any chats. Okay, while we've got that in process, find the lid for my hobby knife, pop that to the side. I'm going to pull out some parchment paper and pop it into my wet palette because we're going to work a little bit on some of the hair for our giant. And then I'm going to get this troll on the handle so that we can work on the troll as well. Troll, cloud giant, brush, I'm going to use a size 2 as we tackle the cloud giant first. And I'm going to work on the shadows first. So for the shadow colors, because the hair, I want it to be white, but I don't want it to be white. Just like the Pegasus, I want to have tonal variation. So on my palette, I'm going to pop some of the purple that I used for the undercoating. And some linen white, because it's off-white. Anything in the shadow is not going to be a bright white. And I'm also going to use just a smidge, where is it? There we go, of desert sand. So I'm going to pop those 3 colors onto my wet palette. That is going to be white. How about that? We're going to make white out of purple, tan, and linen, which is a yellowed white. So process-wise, I'm just going to work on some mixes. And this is going to be the purple and desert sand. So I want to start laying in some colors where I can push the shadow still back. That shadow is still going to stay back there. I'm able to start highlighting some areas of this hair. I'm doing pretty broad strokes here. Because I want those shadows to remain nice and deep, I am leaving some of those visible. And of course this one here, the angles are a little challenging in some of the areas. You can see I'm not doing every little bit. And this is not the end-all be-all, so we may even go back through and change some of this up. Who knows? We'll see as we're going through how we like it. But start framing some of it in. Starts to highlight that shadow color, give us some variation. Still in that same tone, that same purple. I don't have a... need to be able to dry my brush. And then process-wise, this is going to be exactly the same as what we do with our highlight color as well. We'll put down that blue and start mixing in at that point. Instead of the desert sand and linen white, we'll actually use linen white and white. So we'll do it a little bit different. Now this one here is just our same tone but more desert sand. So we're just lightening up this palette. I'm trying to keep previous color very visible. So making sure that I don't completely cover up that last highlight I did with the blend, but also going through and doing a little bit of almost like lines or dashes in this paint so that it's rough on the edges. I don't want smooth, easy transitions, or lined, I guess, transitions. I want it to be a flat surface from color to color. I want it to be broken up so it blends easier. And this here is all just about lightening it up in a shadow tone. Our highlights will start getting smaller and smaller and smaller. In this type of area, and then we'll start picking out individual hairs in white, and that will really give us the illusion of white hair. But you can start to see the tonal lightening. Now we're going to do the same, but a little bit more of our desert sand in purple. Now this will be the last bit we use this size 2 brush on, because here we're just laying down the tone. Once we get to the individual hairs, we want to really be able to highlight those with a smaller brush. So we'll switch to a size 1. Or maybe even a size 0, depending on how we're feeling. Whew. So my plan is we're going to get this tone done on the hair and put a little base coat on the troll, and then take a stretch break while I clean the Pegasus and get ready for a base coat on that. now mostly desert sand and just a touch of our purple. Give that brush a real good rinse, and then I'm going to switch out. So with this figure here, I'm actually, it's taking a little bit longer than I anticipated. Again, part of it is because it's so big. But another part is there are two things I've had to redo from the beginning. Excuse me. So the little bit of like tunic piece. At first I did it in orange to really stand out from the blue on the skin, but it was too much contrast, so I had to change it up and abandon that plan. All right, here we go. Now I know this camera does not do as good a job as our previous on capturing these small detail bits. Know that our IT is working on it. We're just waiting on an update to where we can get our regular camera back, and then once we do that, then these broadcasts will be that much better. Here we're starting to pick out kind of individual hairs. And just bringing up from purple closer and closer to white. We'll have 3 more tones that we are able to pop in here. You can see it's getting tighter and tighter, which is what we want. Now we're done working with the tonal planes. We're starting to work on individual hairs. So as we're putting in these bits of highlight, we're separating them out and using more lines, I guess is the best way to put it, or dashes, so that we're focusing more and more on individual strands of hair. Framing that face in beautifully with those purples. Now this is almost all desert sand. You can see how well that has blended in with our previous layers. How we've taken that purple all the way up to this desert sand. and really going carefully as we blend it into the blue. There are a couple of areas where it will blend right into the blue, and we'll do the same process but like reversed in the blue, so it'll stand out really, really well. Now the last bit is going to be adding some of the linen white into our desert sand to brighten that up even more. And this is our final on this color, or on the shadow, I guess I should say. Let me specify, on the shadow. And this is only going to be the brightest highlights. Where is the light just absolutely capturing on this model? So very small, very subtle. Only where we feel the light is going to be just hitting on the hair. Which is funky because you're thinking about this being a shadow. I guess refracted light. Because hair is kind of translucent. Not transparent, but light does shine through it, which gives us kind of that shiny hair. So, you see how fast my brush is drying today because it's so warm and dry in here in my studio. A little bit of a challenge. There we go. There is the shadowed hair. You know, we've still got all the highlight hair to go on this. It's got a long way yet to go. But that is the start. So much more to go on this. There's still, so to do, aside from the hair and the club, I've got these decorative headpiece that is going to be in gold, and then gems. There are a lot of gems on this figure. And then after all of that, I want to touch up the base and do a little bit more detail on the base work. And I've got a little bit of pattern that has come up here on this fabric that I've got to do a little bit of cleanup on. So I've got to work on that a little bit. I actually may try to do a little bit of that. I just want to play with this a little bit and see with these little bits if I'm able to do a good decent start on that. That's actually just some little bit of splash that occurred onto the miniature. So reminder to always make sure you're being very careful and keeping as clean a work area as possible. We will see how those do. Give that a bit, and then we'll see. But there we go. Hair on that one is done. let's move on to our troll, because I said we're going to do some skin tones before we do a stretch. Yeah, we've been going 40 minutes, so let's do some skin tones on this bad boy. I'm going to keep it stupid simple. Now I'm going to find my green liner, which is just a very, very dark, dark, dark green. And that's what we're going to base coat the skin on. It's going to give us a deep, deep, deep shadow on the troll. So as we build up the greens, we're able to keep that. You know what? Actually, no. I'm going to wait on that. Here's what we're... I'm rethinking my thoughts here. One of the challenges with green is how vibrant of a green do you go, right? Some of them have a little more blues, some of them are a little more olive. Alright, I think this is the path we're going to go. We're going to go a little bit lighter green. So I'm going to start with Basilisk Green. Because if this does not come out too dark, it'll be easier to see on the table. Drop my paint. Alright. So for this one here, I'm using a very big brush. Again, I'm not super worried about this one here. This is my base coat. And I am just going through and popping on paint. Now this bones material, I have noted when I'm using my Master Series paint, it doesn't do too bad of adhesion for these models that were in the Bones 5 Kickstarter. So some of the older Bones plastic miniatures, I used to have a lot of problem with the paint adhering to the miniature. Even after you do a good cleanup and really make sure you've got them with no release agent on it, do a boil and a cold. There would still be some times where the paint would just like pull away and cause a little pocket, I guess, to appear. With these figures here, I have not noticed that as prevalently as the earlier Bones models. So I think part of it is the material itself, the plastic that they're using. Could also be just a variant in the release agent from the figure. So generally I try to paint under the skirts black, but I've got this green here and I am going to use it just because the more paint I get on this figure now, the easier it's going to be to do my highlighting and all of that. So this is just what I plan to use as the base coat for the green. We'll highlight up from here on this figure for the skin tone. And then all the other colors doesn't really matter. We can paint over green pretty easy. It's not too difficult to paint over, especially with some of the other colors we're going to be using, like the browns for furs. The tortoiseshell will have greens and yellows and browns, so color-wise, green isn't too bad to start with compared to some other color options we could do. So I know this is not pretty. Base layering a tabletop miniature just is not super pretty. It's all just about getting a good layer of paint that you can build off of. And you don't want it too thin so that it doesn't adhere, but you want it thin enough that you can get into the crevices and cracks and all the little areas. Under the chin. In the eyes and ears. Now, I do like this troll from Reaper. I have to say, this is very much like an old school D&D troll. It's got the big like hook nose and almost like rubbery, warty skin and kind of scrawny. As a old school gamer, this, when I think of D&D trolls, this is exactly what I picture, primarily because the art in early books, this is how they were kind of pictured. So it's super exciting to see this shape of troll, because some of the other trolls that you can find in miniatures are a lot different. Some of them you may think of as like ogres or what have you. So when I saw with this set that how these trolls looked, I was like, oh yeah, sign me up for that. Sign me up for that, because those are old school trolls that I love pitting my players against. So I did have, I hate to say an argument, I did have a discussion online with a couple of other GMs. We were talking about trolls, and their comment was they hate using trolls in any of their games because their players just metagame and automatically start bringing out torches and fire and yada 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 yada. And for me, I'm in a completely different camp. I really like trolls because they are a classic monster, but I honestly don't think that something like that is metagaming. Because if trolls populate the world, wouldn't you think there would be stories that mothers tell their children or fathers tell around the fireplace, friends tell each other, about trolls, and that, Sir Grimsbane was able to beat trolls by beating it with a fire? I mean, you would have to think, right, that there are stories about trolls that are told in our game worlds. I think it makes sense that they would have stories on how to defeat trolls. So I don't view it as metagaming. I'd be interested to hear what other people think, though. Do you think it's metagaming? If so, why? So now we just let this fellow marinate a bit. And we've been going about 49 minutes now. I try to go a full hour, but I'm going to go ahead and get my stretch in. While I am getting my stretch in, make sure you get your stretch in too. Pop a comment in and let me know what you think. I'm going to pop some of these miniatures down here so we can show them on camera for anybody who stops by. Oh, I got to bring this one because I'm going to rinse this one out. Let's see, what else can we do? We just worked a little bit on basing on this bad boy here. So we'll pop him right like that. All right, I will be right back, and we'll get back into some more painting, and starting with the Pegasus, I believe. Make sure you stand up, you stretch, you get that workout going. All righty. Good stretching in place. Get my, ooh, hit that camera real hard. Get my dry brush and try to pull away all the bits of water. Make sure I've gotten all the little shavings off of this Pegasus, because we are going to do a base coat. Now I did think about doing a underpainting on this, where I would do browns for the shaded areas, under the wings, under the body, under the neck, under the head, little bits under the mane, and then the blue grays for the upper areas. The challenge with underpainting, of course, is that it does require a lot more time. And I don't know that I want to put in that time for this miniature. I have not committed to it. So I'm not positive if I'm going to do that or not. So I think we're just going to do a base coat of a bluish gray. And then build up to white from there. And that way we've got a good tonal undertone. And as we build up, we're able to really highlight the musculature and areas where that light is going to be hitting, because as a heroic figure, this will have for me anyhow, an expectation that the light is coming from directly above the miniature. So I'm going to focus in on the lower areas first, getting into these wings, which are absolutely beautifully sculpted. Lots of detail on here. These are going to be a little bit of a challenge to paint because they are so detailed. There are just absolute amazing striation lines in the feathers. So if you're a speed painter and do like dry brush, this would be a fantastic one for that aspect, because the sculpt is just extremely well done. Lots of detail was put into this figure. And you can see I move around quite a bit. Oh, I had a little dribble there. Let's get that picked up. But because I want that paint to dry completely, I don't want to pull that base coat away. And this is almost like primering, I guess you would say. The variation is when you're primering, that is designed to keep the paint adhered to the miniature. When I am base coating, I am putting on a base color that I'm going to build my paint palette off of. So this is, for me, this is going to be the shadow color. Depending on the technique you're using, if, for instance, you're planning to do a wash for your shadows, you would then do your base coat with your midtone. So it all depends on the technique that you're going to be doing, what color you use for a base tone. But base tones for me are super important. It is the foundation upon which your entire project will be built. So super, super important to get it right. And again, another big miniature. Lot of area. A lot of area to paint. Try to make sure that I get all the detail area filled in, and then pull up any excess paint so I can then move it on to a different area. And this is a lot different than if this were, say, a bust or something I'm entering in competition. There are so many variations when you're painting miniatures. For me anyhow, I have so many variations. I would love to hear how you vary your miniature painting when you are doing something for your own tabletop versus display versus competition or exchange. What do you do differently? Do you do anything differently? Maybe you don't. I'd be interested to hear. For me, part of it is getting that green stuff covered up too, is going to help me get a better visualization on painting this miniature. You know, when I see them with the patchwork, you know, fillers and things like that, it is to some degree a little more challenging to be motivated to paint it. For me, it looks so much further away from being done. It's like, man, that's going to take a lot of work. I'm not ready to get there yet. So I find I can procrastinate more the further I am from the finish line. I don't know if that makes sense. Probably not. But I find when I start a miniature, early on it's easier for me to procrastinate finishing that miniature out if I don't take some good steps and get it to certain areas or you know, milestones, maybe certain points. If I don't get it to certain points in a timely manner, I find it more difficult to paint. To complete, to get back in. So this one, actually, the wings have been adhered. This green stuff had been in place. This has been ready to get its base coat on. And since probably October, and it is now March. So a long time that I procrastinated just getting the cleanup done and a base coat on. But now this is going to motivate me to get it over the finish line. So I'm looking for areas that are nice and dry. I can get this base coat on. So Pegasus, like I said, this is one that I have not painted before. I have not painted a Pegasus before. Now I've painted quite a few different horses, cavalry, but never a Pegasus. And at first I thought about going like so crazy and doing like a galaxy pattern under the wing. I really thought about doing like making it Appaloosa or a paint. I mean, really going a lot more distinctive horse. I really had to rein myself in on what I was going to do. So give my brush a quick rinse. I've used up the base coat that I've put on my palette. So while that gets a moment to dry, I'll do a little bit more. Paint on there. That way we can just keep popping this base coat in, getting it ready for starting to shade and highlight. And I did mention this is going to be the shadow color. So when I talk about shade and highlight, the shading on this is already going to be done. This is the deepest shadow color. So I don't need to do any shading, any painting of shadows, any washes, based on my current expectations. However, that may change as we paint, but I currently am not anticipating having to do any shadow painting. And you can see in these feathers, I try to go a few different directions just to make sure I get those striations, all of those lines covered. I want this color to get into the deepest recesses. And because of those details, you're actually, though it may not look it, you've actually got a lot of surface that you've got to cover, because each of those striation lines as they go in has basically two sides plus the bottom. So it may not look it, but those areas are some of the biggest as far as what it takes for paint. You can see that deeper gray next to the fresh, where it's much lighter. So I'll just reiterate how good of a shadow color this is going to be. Because it does have a strong, good, deep gray about it with a hint of blue, which I know this camera is not going to pick that up. Of course, once it's done, posted on Instagram, those images are much better at showing the variations on color and tone. If you have not seen or checked out the Instagram for Green Oaks Gaming, please make sure you do so. Paste a lot of my miniatures that I paint on Instagram. Oh, gnarly, gnarly, gnarly. What Looks like we've got a warning. Make sure if you have Amber Alert going on, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and follow the directions. If you see any vehicles or persons matching descriptions given, I do have a number to call, or call your local law enforcement agencies. As a dad, Amber Alerts for me are no joke. They make me, I can only imagine what some of those parents go through. Luckily, I have not had to deal with having to issue an Amber Alert or be part of an issued Amber Alert on behalf of my kids. So lucky me. Like a little bit of a blob there. Let's get that out. Right, getting down to the last little areas here on this tone, on this base coat, and then we'll go through and look for areas that we did not get good opaque coverage on. Once we make sure we get it all covered. Now I've got a lot on this wing yet to do, especially on the underside. And then we'll just give a little eyeball. Got a lot on the tail yet to do, and then of course the base. Now the base I'm not as worried about because it's kind of a stony base. It's got a bit of like busted pillar in it and everything. It's going to be a different color anyhow, so I'm not super worried about it. The only reason that it would get any of this base coat is because I've got extra on my palette that I want to use up. So until the figure itself is all done, I'm not worried about that. I'm going to move to the tail here, get this little bad boy. And I just want to make sure that I've got good solid coverage completely over this miniature. All the nooks and crannies, all the little crevices of the primary Pegasus. And not worried about the base, just the Pegasus itself. And it looks like primary area, I've got the wing left, and that will be it. And then our base coat, our shadow tone, will be done. Aside from just making sure that we've got good opacity, good coverage. Ooh, got a little too much there. That means we got to work fast and use it up so it does not dry thick and hide details. Too thick a paint, you're going to lose all those details that are sculpted in. So we're going to work fast and move it around. Make sure we're pulling it up and getting it moved to the next section before it has a chance to dry and block out those details. Now, additionally, you could just add some water and water it down. The challenge with that is on this base coat, at that point, that's where you could see some of the paint not adhere to the plastic. So I want to avoid that route and just work fast, lifting excess paint off before it can dry and fill so that we still maintain all of our details. Alrighty. Go through, make sure I got all the areas. All right. I just want to give a once over real quick. Looks like that side could use a little bit in the main. That side a little bit as well. We'll wait for that to dry though, because that side has got a little bit of wet to it. While that's drying, let's just check and see how our coverage is for our troll. Not too bad, not too bad. A little thin in a couple of areas, so I may go through actually and do another bit of our base shadow green, which is Basilisk Green, on there. And same exact process. This is a super focused base coat. I'm not looking for not having any like paint over or anything like that. So I'm using just a big brush, just popping this paint on. The finer detail brushes come out when we start doing finer detail areas. Ultimately, I could airbrush this, but my airbrush is a little loud, so I have not used it on camera yet. But I may at some point. We'll see. For some reason, I talked myself into doing two kind of larger size minis again with this troll and the Pegasus. I just finished a 28 millimeter, a couple of them actually, a cleric and a thief, or rogue, I guess, rogue. I'm used to saying thief. But just finished those out, just posted those on Instagram. Those were a lot of fun. Those were from one of my shows on Wednesday night. I build characters and monsters based off of these miniatures. So the cleric and the rogue were characters that we built on the stream. And then I'm thinking about doing some type of a poll or something. So I've got the character sheets, filled them out via pencil and actually rolling the dice, the whole 9 yards. So I thought, should we use those as some type of a giveaway? Should we sell them? What should we do? I don't know. So at some point I've got to do a poll before I do too many more, because my shelf space is starting to fill up on miniatures that I need to paint. For instance, I've got a cleric and a sorceress next in line. So I'm not doing myself any favors. There we go. Good solid base coat on our troll. And now I just want to give that Pegasus an eyeball. I had mentioned that the mane in here, so I've thinned this just a touch so that we can get into these deepest crevices. And make sure we get both sides of this mate nice and full. Shadow color. We'll look around and make sure that we've got good opacity, good coverage throughout the wings and the edges of the wings. Oh, I see a little bit of area there. The edges are an area you really want to watch and make sure that you've covered well. You don't want lines. Make sure those edges are all nice and neat. Good coverage. And there we have the base coat on our Pegasus, as well as the base coat on our Troll. Two miniatures that we've got started, and with the base coats kind of setting the standards. Looks like I've got to run though, so I'm going to do a quick stretch and we may be back.